Welcome to Aviation Careers Podcast. My name is Carl Valerian. I'll be your host today. In today's episode, we answer a question from a listener concerning logging flight time as a pilot when operating as a flight instructor and as a Part 135 pilot. You might be surprised by what some operators are doing to attract pilots, and some of it's not legal. We'll get to that in a minute, but first of all, a shout out to our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Tammy Bartlett. And remember, she was actually in the Stuck Mike Avcast as a guest, and she has courses on building confidence in aviation through her mental performance training, and she can be found at tammybartlett.com. We'll have a link in the show notes to you. And she's giving away some scholarships guides, and she's doing that through her coupon code CrossCheck. Those scholarships guides the directory has over $120 million in scholarships for all sorts of things, getting ratings, maybe going and getting your degree, possibly just, getting your ATP, CTP. We have all sorts of stuff in there. I really encourage you to visit her website and so you can build confidence through her mental performance training, and also listen to her interview on our sister podcast, Stuck Mike Avcast, episode 317. Again, we'll have that link in the show notes there. And if you're looking for one of those free scholarships guides, easy. Just go to aviationcareerspodcast.com/free and get yours for free from our sponsors, specifically using the coupon code CrossCheck from Tammy Bartlett. She was a really terrific person and really will help you build your confidence in aviation. Well, let's get started with the show talking about a couple different things. First of all, 135, logging, flight time, etc. And someone who's going to help me talk a little bit about the legal side of that is someone who's been on before, and that is Chris Pizzala with the law offices of Robert M. Strumer. Hey, Chris, how you doing, man?
Hey, Carl. Good. How you doing?
I am doing wonderful. You are in, you said sunny, where are you? Sunny in Daytona Beach, I think you said.
Daytona Beach. Not quite sunny today. You can see the rain in the background.
Yeah, I was joking because it's raining all over Florida here. It's one of those days that I think there's certain schools that couldn't fly today. And I always say how you want to go to South California or Arizona or Florida and for the weather, but this is one of those days. Didn't work out so well. Good for IFR, though. Just a few thunderstorms, etc. Well, Chris, we're going to talk a little bit about 135, but first, in this question that this person asked through our contact page, one of the things that we discussed, or this person discussed, is the different flight time and, what are the things that the airlines are looking for. So first of all, not all flight time is created equal. The one most important thing to think about is what is that airline looking for in the application? And usually they're looking for multi-engine time to be number one, but they want you to have 1,500 hours possibly. They also might want you to have your ATP. But as far as flight time is concerned, multi-engine PIC turbine, of course, is going to be the best. Multi-engine PIC turbojet would be even better. But a lot of us can't do that. So what do they do? What do? We go back to doing flight instructing, trying to do 135 and air taxi and that type of thing. And to do that, we usually can get on with some of these organizations with a lot less than 1,500 hours, 135 minimums. But the problem that a lot of people run into, especially when I'm coaching people, is that sometimes they will put down time in their logbook, which the airlines look at and say, hey, wait a minute, this really isn't PIC time, or it really isn't PIC time. As a matter of fact, it's not even SIC time, and we need to kind of correct that in your logbook. So just really be careful when you're putting things in your logbook as far as time is concerned. And we'll get a little bit more into that as far as moving into some of the 135s, but if you're working as a flight instructor and you're looking to get in the 135 world, just be careful with whom you go with, because some of these people out there are really not advertising what they really have, and what they don't have is PIC turbine, and even though it looks like that in the advertisement. But let's move back here. We'll talk about that in a minute as far as some of the ads on the 135. Chris, we're going to talk a little bit about flight instructing, and also working for some of these 135s or 134 and a half, as sometimes we call them. We can get into a little bit of trouble doing some flight instructing while we're flight instructing, especially when people come to us and say, hey, listen, I got this great 135 job for you, or I have this job for you to fly someone from point A to point B, and you ask the question, are you 135? It's like, oh, no, don't worry about it. You're a flight instructor. You can fly them from point A to point B. So what kind of issues do people run into when they actually fly through that situation that I described?
Well, that's certainly one of the situations we see is flight schools that are taking people point to point and claiming it as flight instruction. Now, normally, if you have a flight student who is in training and they're going point to point, that's one thing. But when you have an individual who's never done a flying lesson before and suddenly their introductory flight happens to be across a large distance, maybe even a return flight, this is where it starts to look a lot more like a illegal charter.
Interestingly, though, you do see this happen every so often where people will actually sign up for flight lessons and they're making no progress, and all they're doing is doing cross-country flights. And it just happens to be those places where that person owns a business or has business. Can that be construed as a possible 135-ish type of operation?
That certainly could be considered a charter or a carrying for hire. And if you're going to be doing that and the person's really not pursuing a certificate, then the operator of the plane and the pilot need to be a Part 135 operation or a Part 121 operation, but they need to be certified.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's so one of the things that I want people to really tune in on is you can do 135 single engine. A lot of people say, no, you can't, but you can. But if you're working as an instructor, you may actually be asked to do some commercial flying, right? Well, one of the things you might want to be cognizant of is if someone hires you to fly their aircraft, you can do that, right? You can fly the aircraft from point A to point B. But Chris, I think some of the times we get in trouble is when someone says, okay, I want you to fly my 182 from here in Lakeland to Miami with a client on board. And by the way, we're going to charge the client and they're going to reimburse us for this flight. What type of issues are there with that statement?
Right. So if you say owned an aircraft, you could hire me as a commercial pilot to fly you somewhere. And that's perfectly fine if you own it or you dry lease it to yourself. But if you're hiring me to fly your plane and carry some other person or somebody else's belongings, now we've moved back into that charter world. So that niche where a commercial pilot can fly somebody else's plane is really narrowed to where that individual benefiting owns the airplane and it's that person in the airplane.
Yeah, so a lot of this has to be, and that's where it's kind of strange, isn't it, for some people, because they think, well, I own the airplane, right? You would think when you first buy it, say, I can do anything I want with it, and I can charge them, my customer, for using the plane to go from point A to point B. But I do know firsthand from owning a 182 with a person that owned a business, you got to be real careful about how that's billed. And if your travel is just, if it happens to be your travel from point A to point B, or if it's something that's being billed to the customer, those are two separate things, aren't they?
They are. It's a very fine line. And a lot of times we see pilots, newer, younger pilots being hired in to fly somebody else's airplane, and they're being told, oh, this is okay, or these are just my friends, or we're part of some kind of a flying club, quote unquote. I hear all different titles that people try to claim. But the short answer is if you're flying somebody else for money to take them somewhere, and it's anybody other than the owner of that airplane, then we're back into the charter world, and we are looking something where we need a 135 certificate.
Chris, where I'm going with this. This question I get all the time is, okay, so what? I'm actually flying somebody from point A to point B using their airplane. I'm not going to get caught. There's no way. I mean, I'm going to get caught doing this. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. What would you say to somebody who says that? Because I've actually had someone say that.
Well, I mean, they do happen all the time, and you're not guaranteed to get caught, of course. But being caught operating a charter, it will not just be on the owner of the airplane. It'll be on the pilot as well. And we've had calls where the owner of a jet has hired somebody to fly them around, and then they've thrown their friends on the plane and charged them. and now that pilot is losing all of his certificates. So, conducting on 134.5, even as the pilot and just the pilot, you can lose all of your certificates. But even more than that, you essentially have no insurance because no insurance company is going to insure a charter company that doesn't comply with the Part 135. So any insurance on that plane you might have had is gone. And if something happens, you can be sued personally right along with the owner of the airplane.
So some of these charter companies that are out there, they're not doing anything nefarious, but maybe they're kind of advertising, possibly misleading the person that's getting hired. Not the case with what we were just talking about, but an actual 135 that says, hey, you can come fly with us in the right seat and build time while you're flying. Well, what happens, some of these people that advertise these quote-unquote SIC positions, what really happens, and I've seen this happen a few times, is you get to the job, they pay you really good money, but essentially you're a baggage handler because in their certificate, they don't have SIC or a pilot development program. So that leg that you're flying with passengers on board, you're basically just a passenger. You're not logging any of that time. When you get to your destination, drop those people off, a lot of times that's when you start to actually log the flight time is coming back on an empty leg. And I've seen this happen where they actually, during the empty leg is when they actually get to fly, but they're not logging enough hours because half the time they're not logging, or more than half the time, they're not logging flight time because that leg that they're flying, they're not a necessary crew member. All they're doing really is helping with the baggage. So that's something that will actually not help you move forward in your career because you want to log flight time. There's nothing wrong with that situation. It's just the fact that, you have been going to this job, have been thinking, I'm going to build a lot of flight time, and you're not really building as much flight time as you think you are. From a legal standpoint, though, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, there is nothing wrong with that. If you're just on board the aircraft and helping load bags on and off, you're basically just another passenger. You're on that leg that they're charging passengers for.
Essentially, I mean, you can be there as an employee of the company. You just are not going to be able to log that flight time.
Yeah, and so that was the big argument. People are like, well, then why would they hire me? Maybe they'll hire you to do this work because it helps their operation, maybe help move passengers and bags and things like that. I actually used to do this with a company that did 135 when I started helicopter training, but I knew up front I couldn't log any of the time except the empty leg back, and the guy happened to be a flight instructor and was helping me get some time. But that was really cool. But I spent like half a day and I maybe get an hour of flight training. So from a career perspective, it's not the best thing in the world. But let's take a little bit deeper dive into the 135 world, where they actually have advertised that you are getting SIC time, and in some cases you really shouldn't log that as SIC. So let's look at some of those things. So there's a 135 out there that says, okay, you can log this as SIC time, and then you look on their certificate, there is no pilot development program, there's no necessity for that person to be in the right seat. In that case, and I don't know if you've ever seen any of those cases like that, they really shouldn't be logging time at all if it's not necessary for the operation or the insurance.
We have seen that. We received a call recently on that. So I do an analysis. I mean, I look at the aircraft first. If your 135 operator has a Boeing business jet, that requires two people, right? So any aircraft that requires, by type certificate, two pilots, that's going to be one where you can log the time. Or if the operation requires it. The operators of some smaller airlines sometimes require two pilots on an aircraft that if it was operating as a private aircraft, it would only require one, or in certain circumstances it requires two. That's fine. And then, of course, I'm sure you're going to talk about the pilot development programs. And as long as that is approved as an ops spec in their manual, that is permitted as well.
Yeah, and that great segue. As far as the pilot development programs, there are some within the airline. There's a lot of them out there where they're actually grooming that pilot to be at a pilot in command by having them operate as a second in command. There's people that do that anyway. They have them ride along and they say, okay, come observe. But there's a difference. If I say to you, hey, come observe, you're an observer. If we have a pilot development program in place at the 135, there's actually an ability to actually log that time. And I'm sure that some people have run into that problem where they didn't have that type of pilot development program and they weren't a necessary crew member there. But have you, in your experience, have you had to deal with this where you've had to ask people, hey, do you have a pilot development program?
We have indeed. So we see a lot of companies using the term pilot development program or pilot pipeline, and it gets a little confusing. But in terms of logging the flight time, if this is an aircraft in an operation that wouldn't normally require, say, a second in command, then what we need to see is a operation specification in their FAA certificate. And so, they just ask the employer for the FAA certificate. That's something that all the pilots should be allowed to see and have access to. And if they don't have it specifically in the manual approved by the FAA, then most likely that flight time is not going to be valid towards an FAA certificate or towards future employment.
And that brings up a great point when you are looking at a job, say in one of these 135s where they have a pilot development program. Ask for their op specs and say, hey, listen, I just want to start studying before I get there and try to get all the knowledge I can before I show up for training. That's, I think, a better way sometimes to ask for the op specs and see, instead of coming out and say, hey, is this pilot development program for real? That's not the way to ask for it. And this is a really good thing for people to build hours. I think it's terrific. It's just make sure it is part of their op specs. And you can simply do that by, also you can fish for it or look for it online. A little bit tougher. It's easier to just go ahead and ask for it from the airline. So good point there. What other things do you think that would concern them as far as the looking at a 135 operation from the viewpoint of logging time?
Well, as you mentioned, SIC, PIC, so you're only going to have one PIC unless you're actually doing instruction in the aircraft. So I spoke to somebody who had worked at a 135 where both pilots are captain qualified. And I said, well, how do you figure out who logs what? And he says, well, we're both captain qualified, so we would just change seats every other time and, log the time that we flew in the left seat as PIC. And I think he said in that case there was no SIC requirement, so they weren't logging any SIC. So again, not a real fast time build, but that was a better way to do it.
Yeah, great point. And by the way, that actually may not be faster to build time, but you are building PIC time. So that's good. I mean, you're not building it quite as fast as maybe if you got a job where you're the captain and always building the PIC time. And I understand that it's a little bit tougher market right now. You're looking here in June of 2024, just a little bit tougher market. So you may have to get a job that's just like that. Now let's look at this time that we're building and the logbook that we're putting together so they can bring it forth to the airlines. Many, I should say, of the 121 operators can be skeptical of some of your flight time in your logbook, especially when it comes to SIC and even PIC time. And so that's where, when you're logging this time, not just from a legal standpoint, but from a career standpoint, make sure that it's proper and that it's correct. And I have had clients that I've coached where we've had to go back and change some of that time because it wasn't PIC time and they logged it as PIC time. Your situation, what you just described, where one person decides, okay, I'm PIC on this leg and I'm not on this leg, that's a great example of what you should be doing before the flight and deciding who's going to be the pilot in command and who's not going to be the pilot in command. And I know that a lot of folks out there understand that the airlines are skeptical of time, and that's kind of why. The other part, and this kind of gets into another maybe sub-discussion on this, is some people wind up pencil whipping their logbook, because I guess is a good way to say that, and meaning that they're putting in time that they really shouldn't. And I know, or I'm thinking, Chris, that you've had to deal with this in the past.
So we've definitely heard stories of people putting in time. Fortunately, I haven't had to work on any, but I know of at least one legacy carrier that is very skeptical of time and logbooks. And not only will they cancel your interview, they will blacklist you if they think that you have lied to them. The honesty part is really important. So trying to log a few hours at the beginning of your career could end up costing you a lot in the end. So it's better to err on the side of caution and make sure that that flight time is really going to count. The other thing I can say is to be transparent to the future employer. So I had somebody call me one day and say, "Hey, I just got a job interview, and I've been logging this, in his case, SIC time, and I just discovered that the operator lost the op spec and wasn't actually allowed to let me log that." And I said, "Okay, well, here's what we're going to do. I don't think this time is going to work, but you've already got the interview. So let's segregate that time. And when you go to the interview, tell them that this time is under these conditions and that, you're not sure, if it's going to count at this point, and let them decide if they want to count that or not."
That's a great point, especially like people that log time like they were in a simulator or something like that, and then you realize, hey, this actually wasn't simulated time, and it was, so sometimes you have to go back and correct your logbook. I did that, had to correct my logbook, and you just, put a line through it, say, hey, I made a mistake. As far as the flight time is concerned, going back to the situation where you actually have an aircraft that requires 2 crew members, that's one of those times where you can log that as SIT if it requires it for the type certificate. If you have to have 2 crew members on board, where it gets kind of wishy-washy is when you just have the one required, but it could be required based on the op specs of that operator, and that's something that we have to look at. If you do have a problem trying to figure this out, Chris, as far as whether it's required or not, what advice would you give to somebody?
Well, the obvious starting point, of course, is to look at the FARs, see if they have any comments on that. A lot of times they can be kind of thin. So the next stop, of course, is to see an aviation attorney or a career coach and maybe get some advice from them on what might or might not be counted. And again, if you've already logged it and you're not sure about it, break it out, separate that, and identify that on your job application that here's where this time came from. Just like my glider time, I keep that separate because a lot of airlines only count that as half time or no time. So if you're really unsure about something, the honesty is more important. And you can say, well, here's 100 hours, but here's where it came from. And if the employer says, we're okay with that, great. And if the employer says, well, we don't really count that, hopefully they'll invite you back for another interview, or maybe they're just okay with the flight time you do have. But it's better to do that than passing it off. The other thing is I always make a comment. I still have a paper logbook, but I always put in the remarks section what the flight time was, whether it's me giving training, what employer I was working for. I always try to put some remark there so that somebody looking at the logbook could figure out where this flight time came from.
We can look at another situation too, and I think this is important, not just the 135 time, but just in logging time in general, and how to avoid some really common errors is, a lot of people say, hey, I'm a flight instructor. I can log everything as flight time because I'm in the airplane, I'm rated, so I could just put it down as dual given. You can run into a bit of a problem with that. And what are do you have an example maybe of where someone can run into that problem where they say, hey, I'm actually in the airplane with this person. Why can't I just log it as dual given?
Of course, well, you should only be logging dual given if you're actually giving instruction. So, you've heard of backseat drivers. I'm a backseat pilot. So if I fly with you, I'm probably yelling at you anyways. I feel like that counts. But on a serious note, if you've gone on a cross country or something with maybe an experienced pilot who's just not comfortable, then that's fine. You're giving instruction. You're there as part of the flight crew. If, on the other hand, you're just flying around with another flight instructor building flight time, this is where we get into the gray area.
Absolutely. And that's where, many of us think, oh, I can always log every time because you hear me talk about it a lot, is one of the great things about getting your CFI is that you can log almost all the time that you're in the airplane. Notice the word almost all the time because it's not all the time that you're in the airplane. And that's something that you really have to look at while you're in that airplane and deciding, hey, are we actually doing flight instruction, like you said, or are we actually doing like a charter flight? But this is, some really, really good information. Some of the things while we're, talking about, I think we can mention too, is just some of the decisions that we make as a pilot trying to build flight time. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that. There are some time, and we might even do a whole other episode about this, but some of the things just we should look at when we're building flight time. There are certain things that might be a really bad decision to do. And that's part of that is looking at the job and saying, hey, this looks wonderful. They're paying me a lot of money, but I'm not flying at all. And those are cool because you're getting money, but you're sitting on the ground all the time, and you're just not going to build your hours towards your actual rating. Any other examples you might have about some of the bad decisions maybe some instructors make when they start looking at some of those jobs?
I think one of the ones we see the most often are folks are hired by smaller companies to do passenger or cargo, and they sign these training commitments that go on for usually about 2 years, and then 6 months in, they don't want to work there anymore. So it's really important to do the research and do your homework on a company before you commit to something in writing that's going to potentially cost you a lot of money. But we see a lot of heartache and a lot of heartburn with people trying to get back out of companies they don't want to work for anymore.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that on pilot contracts, especially in our group coaching session that we did. But we could also maybe even do a whole other episode on that. Some of these contracts, you really have to be careful with because if you're someone who just signs things without looking at it, it's not a good idea. And if you want, you can have someone take a peek at that. And you can get an aviation attorney to take a look at it as far as the contract's concerned, or your friends that are attorneys say, hey, am I going to be responsible for paying these guys back for training? And usually you are. Those are coming back again more and more. I think you've seen an uptick in it, haven't you, Chris?
We saw a big uptick post-COVID because a lot of the legacy and other major carriers were hiring, so people were stepping through the regionals and some of the other small companies really quickly. We're not seeing them quite as much today, but we do see them, and we do see them being enforced, which is the scary part, is that you leave this job because you're not making enough money, and now suddenly somebody's chasing you down for $15,000. That's really stressful, and then, of course, a process server shows up at your house. That's not a fun experience. So, if you're going to sign one of those, you need to be sure that you really want to do that. And again, do the research, do your homework in the company, because some companies are very legitimate and they're just trying to keep their training costs down. And some companies are trying to keep employees from leaving because they're not great companies, and the employees tend to turn over because they're not great companies.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a whole nother episode. We should talk about that sometime. Avoiding bad decisions while building flight time, because there's a lot of bad decisions you can make out there. Ones that'll hold you up from moving into another job, and ones that might cause you to possibly lose your license. Just like we talked about here, certain things you need to know about logging flight time before you take a 135 job. My advice to you is to look at that 135, try to find their op specs. Sometimes the bigger companies, the large outfits out there, they usually are doing most things by the rules, so you don't have to worry about them as much. But there's so many small operators out there, there's tons of them out there, that you can get hired by that you have no way of knowing whether they're legitimate or not. But just ask for those op specs, do some research, do some background checks. Look at some of the different organizations out there that, like the Argus rating and those different ratings for these companies that describe whether they have a good operation and also a safe operation. And we could even do a whole episode about that too. But Chris, as far as, kind of summing up here in the 135 environment, if somebody was coming to you and said, hey, should I worry about logging this 135 time, a general statement, what would you tell them?
I would say, again, are you a required crew member, and or is there an op spec for a pilot development program that is specifically in the certificate that the FAA issues, because the FAA has to authorize that. Those are the big questions.
And you can also go find an attorney that can help you out. Chris, you actually work for a law firm. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, of course. I'm a partner with the law office of Robert Strumer. We work mostly with pilots and small plane owners, as well as a couple of small businesses. And so we see questions about flight time logging and pilot certification. So we're always here, happy to help. You can find us at strumerlaw.com.
Awesome. Well, Chris, I appreciate your coming here today. It's been awesome talking about this. We're definitely going to have you back on. We kind of teased a little bit about making bad decisions while you're moving into the flight instruction realm. I also have gotten a lot of feedback. People want to know. I did the whole thing about how to make $1 million as an airline pilot. I do talk about how I get so many days off and how I do that. I will do an episode about that, I do promise. But if you want to come see us in the crew here, either at Stuck Mike Avcast or Aviation Careers Podcast, we're going to show up at some of the air shows in November is the Florida International Air Show. We do that every year. We're also at Sun and Fun. So start looking for us in all those different places because we definitely are going to be showing up there. And also check out their Facebook page and the Twitter and Instagram to find out more about when we're having these coaching sessions. We also started this group coaching, and it's actually Coach It Forward. You can use a coupon. You get 1 month free, so you can go check it out. And that's where we do this one-on-one. It's inspirational. We have stories that are inspirational. We have a topic, and then we answer questions. I'm more of in a group coaching session. Of course, we do the one-on-one coaching, but the neat thing about this, it's really inexpensive, and it's just once a month. It's only $20 a month right now, and we get together and answer those questions that you may have, and also talk a little bit about what's going on in the aviation industry. So that's a big part of it. We talk about that here too, but it's also good to hear from your peers and see that in a very safe environment that, yeah, we're going through these problems too. We're not the only one, and it's nice to hear from other people. And we also keep, held people accountable. Hey, if you say you're going to get your CFI by next month, we ask, hey, did you get your CFI or not? And why not? Maybe there's some challenges. Maybe we can help you out. And a great way to do that is go out there and check out this course online. It's our group coaching, and use that coupon code Coach It Forward. And if you're looking for a scholarship and you want to try to get some, either a rating, get your CTP, ATP, type ratings, go out there, check it out at aviationcareerspodcast.com/scholarships. Use one of those free coupon codes that we have, and the aviationcareerspodcast.com/free for those free coupon codes. And of course, we really appreciate our sponsors here. And Tammy Bartlett is a sponsor of this podcast, and use that coupon code CROSSCHECK. She has a really cool website out there that tells us how to build confidence through her mental performance training, and especially in aviation. We had her on Stuck Mike Avcast episode 317, and she was terrific. But most importantly, I've told you all these things out here to do, and maybe things like career coaching, mentorship, watching podcasts online, listening to me in your ears. But the most important thing you can do is take one step every day to move forward in your career. It could be something as small as listening to those podcasts. Maybe it's buying a book, signing up for your next rating. But do something for me. Take one step today to move forward in your career and in your life, and I know you will get there sooner than you think. Well, I'm Carl Valeri, Aviation Careers Podcast, and I hope that you take that one step today. Safe flying out there. Take care now.